Yes, I got to know Lawrence Tanner very well. He was a wonderful man. He, of course, had long since left the school. But when I left the school in 1960, in the days before gap years in Thailand and so on, I was faced with about 9 months of not knowing what to do. And I can't remember who suggested it, whether he suggested it to me or I to him. He said it would be nice if I could come and work in the Muniment room, because he was then keeper of the Muniments. And I did that, and it was wonderful training. I was paid £10 a week. And for the first 4 or 5 weeks, he said, just go around the Muniment room, find out what's where, pull out documents and see if you can read them. He taught me to read medieval hands reasonably well, and so on. He used to go round the Abbey. I don't think it was quite every week, but it had been every fortnight, because he said no one ever tells me what they've done in the Abbey, and they're always moving things and so on. And I would accompany him on these visits. When I learned an enormous amount from him about the Abbey, and his ability to remember was extraordinary, because he went right back to the beginning of the century. And yes, a really nice and valuable man. Tragedy was that he went blind, as we know. It was an awful thing for someone who spent their life with documents not to be able to read them at the end.
Was he alone in the Muniment room at that stage, or were there anyone else?
Yes, there were various other people. There was a deputy keeper. What was his name? I can't remember. A small Scotsman. We were joined by a man called Alec B. Tonachie, who had just retired as a keeper in the Romano-British department, what it was called, at the British Museum. And Tonachie was one of the more interesting people that one could meet. He lived somewhere like Earl's Court, and he used to come into the Muniment room every day on the Underground, on the Circle line, not very far, he's based from South Kensington, and he would do the Times crossword, by which I mean he would do the Times crossword entirely from beginning to end in the few railway stops that were available to him. And there were occasional, serious occasions when he was late in, and that meant he hadn't finished the crossword, and because it was the Circle line, he would stay on and go all the way around the Circle line, finish the crossword, and then come in at about 10:30 or something. And there was one terrible day when he didn't come in until after lunch. But I think he'd still finished it on the third time around the Circle line. And he had just written one of the more obscure works, which is entitled A Catalogue of Seal Dies in the British Museum, Volume 1. No one has ever undertaken Volume 2.
Obviously, I guess there was at that stage perhaps more than just muniments, more than just records up in the Muniment room too.
Yes,
before there was
lots of records. Various scholars came in and studied them. One I remember was marvellous. I think I recognised she was a marvellous woman, though she never said anything. Barbara Harvey, who was entirely silent and worked away day in, day out on the Abbey documents, and then produced this great book on the Abbey estates. So I just saw her and realised she was doing wonderful things. There was a Belgian, I think he was, called Pierre Chaplet, who was completely taken up with fake documents. And he used to work away in the Muniment, and occasionally would rush in waving a charter, saying, "I found another one." These were, of course, the forged charters of possessions, which the Abbey has quite a number of. Yes, other people would come in. It was in the Muniment room that I had one of my great experiences, because in the few weeks that I had, the tanner had said to go, just find out what's here. As you will know, if you go in through the door to there's a little spiral staircase up, and on that spiral staircase is a door, a cupboard. And I opened this cupboard, and it was very dark, there was no lighting there in those days, and felt around inside and felt something which felt like, and indeed was, a bone. And it was a very large bone, and it had on it a label tied on it, which I could already recognise as probably a late 17th century hand, and it said, thigh bone of King Edward I. So grabbing this, I went up to see Tanner and said, I found this. That's what he said. And he said, oh yes, that's right. They opened the tomb in whenever it was. And when they put him back, they forgot the thigh bone. So I put it back in the cupboard. And then, not all that long after that, I think the tomb was opened again and the thigh bone was returned. So I'm one of the last people to have held the thigh bone of Edward I.
And was this before there was any kind of museum at the Abbey?
It was before there was any kind of museum. The possessions of the museum were sort of strewn around, mostly in the Muniment room or various other parts. I was delighted as a fencer that the so-called sword of Henry V was just lying on top of one of the cabinets, and I used to pick it up and wave it around because it's a beautifully balanced sword. But of course it's now treated with the